the radio part of the VZ-2500. This is one of the more difficult jobs to do on this, but it's something that's going to have to be done. You find that the selector switches that switch between AM, FM, tape, phono, they get spotty and they don't make contact because the switch contacts inside the switches here, they have real silver plating on them and they tarnish. They get black inside. There's only one way to clean them, to get cleaner into them, and that is you have to pull the radio board back. On the front of the underneath where the controls buttons push, there are several Phillips head screws that lock the switches and the board into the black plastic housing, this big plastic housing which screws to the cabinet. You have to remove those screws, and then comes the tricky part. The tuner drive, the belt, you don't have to de-string it, but what you have to do is pry gently this drum off of the tuner shaft. Be careful here. The tuner shaft itself that goes into the tuner wants to pull out, and there's nothing to keep it in place. If you pull the shaft out of the tuner, there are tiny little gears that look like wristwatch gears that will fall out if you pull this out. I got lucky. I happened to catch it in time before any damage was done. You want to pry between the case of the tuner and this pulley to pull just the pulley out, but be careful you don't unstring it. What I do is I take a couple of pieces of thin wire and thread it through the pulley, the holes of the pulley, and around it, and then tie it in a knot so that it keeps the strings from falling off the pulley. Then you can pull this whole board back, and then in the top of all these little white switches is a tiny square hole. That's the only opening in these switches that you can spray any contact cleaner into. You can't do it from the front, you can't do it from the bottom, you got to do it through the top, and you have to pull the board back in order to get to those holes. I've already done this one and I'm not about to pull it back out again. Now that's the radio board. The radio in this thing had no problems, so I don't have to go into anything on that. You'll notice this was built to be sold overseas in either Germany, Great Britain, whatever. So it uses DIN connectors, and you can get adapters to go between DIN and RCA jacks for the auxiliary input and tape out and so forth. And the antennas are also DIN connections. They're European. This also has multi-worldwide voltage. It'll go between 100 volts and 240 volts, 50 or 60 cycles. So it can be used worldwide. Now on the power packet, the power supply board, you notice I've taken every board out of this set. I had no sound on the record player, and I'd found out why. One of the connectors is broken where it goes into the connector here, so that has to be taken out and soldered. And it's a good practice just to solder all the any bad connections you find. Go over every single one. You don't want to have to do it twice and take it apart again. But I go over every one of them and resolder anything that looks spotty, and that should do it. Now this thing's going to be ready to fire back up again. I got the cabinet cleaned up. I'm just waiting for the speaker grills, the paint to dry. I had to repaint those because they were all they had rust spots on them and they were just ugly. So the cabinet's been cleaned, and then the turntable belt should be here today. So tomorrow this should be up and running. The cassette deck works fine now, and that's going to be ready to go. So tomorrow should have the completed boombox back together and working.